Recovery and modern restorations. Restoration work was undertaken in 1828 by the architect José Contreras, endowed in 1830 by Ferdinand VII. After the death of Contreras in 1847, it was continued by his son Rafael, died 1890, and his grandson Mariano Contreras, died 1912. In 1830, Washington Irving lived in Granada and wrote his Tales of the Alhambra, first published in 1832, which spurred international interest in southern Spain and in its Islamic-era monuments, like the Alhambra, an apartment of which he decorated in New England style. Other artists and intellectuals, such as John Frederick Lewis and Owen Jones, helped make the Alhambra into an icon of the era with their writings and illustrations during the 19th century. The Contreras family members continued to be the most important architects and conservators of the Alhambra up until 1907. During this period, they generally followed a theory of stylistic restoration, which favored the construction and addition of elements to make a monument complete, but not necessarily corresponding to any historical reality. They added elements which they deemed to be representative of what they thought was an Arabic style, emphasizing the Alhambra's purported Oriental character. For example, in 18,581,859, Rafael Contreras and Juan Pugner added Persian-looking spherical domes to the Court of the Lions and to the northern portico of the Court of the Myrtles, even though these had nothing to do with Nasrid architecture. In 1868, a revolution deposed Isabella II, and the government seized the properties of the Spanish monarchy, including the Alhambra. In 1870, the Alhambra was declared a national monument of Spain, and the state allocated a budget for its conservation, overseen by the Provincial Commission of Monuments. Mariano Contreras, the last of the Contreras architects to serve as director of conservation of the Alhambra, was appointed as architectural curator in April 1890. His tenure was controversial, and his conservation strategy attracted criticism from other authorities. In September 1890, a fire destroyed a large part of the Sala de la Barca in the Comares Palace, which highlighted the site's vulnerability. A report was commissioned in 1903, which resulted in the creation of a special commission in 1905, whose task was to oversee conservation and restoration of the Alhambra. But the commission ultimately failed to exercise control due to friction with Contreras. In 1907, Mariano Contreras was replaced with Modesto Sandoya, whose work was also criticized. Sandoya began many excavations in search of new artifacts, but often left these works unfinished. He restored some important elements of the site, like the water supply system, but neglected others. Like Mariano Contreras before him, Sandoya continued to clash with the supervisory body and to obstruct their control. He was eventually dismissed from his post in 1923. After Sandoya, Leopoldo Torres Balbs was appointed as chief architect from 1923 to 1936. The appointment of Torres Balbs, a trained archaeologist and art historian, marked a definitive shift to a more scientific and systematic approach to the Alhambra's conservation. He endorsed the principles of the 1931 Athens Charter for the Restoration of Monuments, which emphasized regular maintenance, respect for the work of the past, legal protection for heritage monuments, and the legitimacy of modern techniques and materials in restoration, so long as these were visually recognizable. Many of the buildings in the Alhambra were affected by his work. Some of the inaccurate changes and additions made by the Contreras architects were reversed. The young architect opened arcades that had been walled up, re-excavated filled-in pools, replaced missing tiles, completed inscriptions that lacked portions of their stuccoed lettering, and installed a ceiling in the still unfinished palace of Charles V. He also carried out systematic archaeological excavations in various parts of the Alhambra, unearthing lost Nasrid structures such as the Palacio del Pardal Alto and the Palace of the Abencerrages, which provided deeper insight into the former palace city as a whole. The work of Torres Bulbs was continued by his assistant, Francisco Prieto Moreno, who was the chief architectural curator from 1936 to 1970. In 1940, a new council of the Alhambra was created to oversee the site, which has remained in charge ever since. In 1984, the central government in Madrid transferred responsibility for the site to the regional government of Andalusia. And in 1986 new statutes and documents were developed to regulate the planning and protection of the site. In 1984, the Alhambra and Generalife were also listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Alhambra is now one of the most popular tourist destinations in Spain. Research, archaeological investigations, and restoration works have also remained ongoing into the 21st century.